At 0847 hours on June 14th, 1944, Marie Catherine Rousseau pressed a thin metal probe into French soil and felt resistance. Not the dull thud of earth, not the scrape of rock. Something else. Something that made her throat close and her vision narrow to the 6 inches of ground in front of her boots. She was 200 yards into a known German minefield, alone, with Wehrmacht machine gunners tracking her from a tree line 400 yards ahead. Behind her, in a drainage ditch that smelled of mud and fear, 300 American soldiers watched a 28-year-old woman do something their commanders had called impossible. The probe hit the object again. Metallic. Shallow. She angled the probe left, found the edge, traced the circumference. Circular. Approximately 8 inches. Tellermine. Anti-tank. Enough explosive to turn a Sherman into scrap and a human being into a red mist. She marked it with white tape, stepped 18 inches to the right, and kept walking. The mathematical reality was simple and terrible. She had 400 more yards to cross. The safe corridor she'd memorized was 3 feet wide, and the Germans had added mines that weren't on the maps she'd stolen. The maps she'd been shot stealing. The maps every male officer had said weren't worth a woman's life. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. But in her mind, a voice kept counting. 201 yards crossed, 399 to go. One mistake. That's all it would take. 6 months earlier, in a freezing December rain, at a forward intelligence post outside Cherbourg, Marie Catherine Rousseau had stood in front of Major William Harding's desk while he read her file and tried not to laugh. She was the daughter of André Rousseau, a cartographer who'd worked for the French military before the occupation. She'd grown up reading topographic maps the way other children read storybooks. She spoke German with a Berlin accent, courtesy of a childhood governess. She had a documented photographic memory that had gotten her recruited by Free French Intelligence, then loaned to the Americans because they needed translators, and she was, in the words of her transfer papers, exceptionally qualified in technical German. What the papers didn't mention was that she was also exceptionally female, and in December 1943, that was a problem. Miss Rousseau, Harding said, not looking up, "You'll be translating intercepted documents. You will work in the tent with the other translators. You will not approach the forward command posts. You will not interact with combat units. You will not, and I want to be very clear about this, insert yourself into tactical discussions. Are we understood?" She understood perfectly. She understood that 3 male translators had already been assigned to the same work. She understood that her security clearance was 2 levels below theirs despite identical qualifications. She understood that when she'd arrived that morning, a sergeant had asked if she was lost, and when she explained her assignment, he'd said, "They're letting secretaries into intelligence now?" But what she said was, "Yes, sir." Understood. The ridicule started immediately. The other translators, all men, all American, none fluent enough to catch the technical nuances she spotted in her first hour, treated her like a mascot. They call her Mademoiselle in exaggerated accents. They question her translations, then use them verbatim in their reports. When she worked late, soldiers would knock on the tent flap and ask if she needed protection from the dark, then laugh. Captain Robert Chun, a combat engineer, was the worst. He'd been in North Africa, seen men die in minefields, and he had no patience for what he called rear echelon decoration. When Marie was introduced at a briefing in January, he'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "What's next? We going to ask the USO girls to clear mines?" The room had laughed. Marie had smiled politely and returned to her translations. But she'd also started noticing something the men hadn't. The Germans were meticulous. Every captured document, every intercepted communication, every scrap of paper pulled from dead officers' pockets, they all referenced maps, coordinates, grid systems. The Wehrmacht didn't improvise their defenses. They documented them. Somewhere behind German lines, there were maps that showed every minefield, every wire, every killing ground. Maps that could save thousands of lives. Maps that no one was trying to steal because the idea of infiltrating a German command post to grab paperwork seemed insane. She mentioned it once, in February, to a lieutenant who'd been almost polite to her. He'd patted her shoulder and said, "That's real creative thinking. But let's leave the tactical planning to the fellows who've seen combat, okay?" On March 3rd, 1944, the 29th Infantry Division hit a minefield outside St. Lo. The Germans had planted shoe mines, small, wooden-cased anti-personnel mines that metal detectors couldn't find. The lead platoon walked into them at dawn. The first explosion killed 3 men instantly. The second came 4 seconds later. Then a third. Then chaos. Men scattered, which was exactly what you weren't supposed to do in a minefield, and more mines detonated. By the time the survivors crawled back to the rally point, 37 men were dead or dying, and another 22 were wounded badly enough to be out of the war. The advance stopped. Not just that platoon. The entire division. Because no one knew where the mines ended. Engineers swept with detectors and found nothing. Soldiers probed manually and died when they missed one. The Germans, safe behind their minefields, poured machine gun fire into anyone who tried to advance. For 3 days, the 29th sat pinned, taking casualties from artillery and snipers, unable to move forward or safely retreat. Marie heard about it when the casualty reports came through intelligence. She also saw the intercepted German communication that referenced Minefields Sector 7B, Vollständig jet plant, Minefield Sector 7B, complete as planned, which meant there was a plan, which meant there was a map. She found Major Harding in the command tent, staring at a topographic map with red X's marking known minefields. There were 14 X's. There were probably 50 actual minefields. "Sir," she said, "I know where the German minefield maps are." He didn't look up. "We all know where they are. Russo, they're behind German lines. Specifically, sir, there's a Wehrmacht engineering unit operating out of Chateau 7 kilometers east of St. Lo. I've been tracking their communications. They reference map storage, coordinate updates. If we could what?" Now he looked up. "Send a team into occupied territory to steal some papers?" "Not a team. Me. I speak German. I can pass as a refugee. The chateau is partially destroyed, lightly guarded because it's behind their defensive line. I can absolutely not." Captain Chun had walked in mid-conversation. "With respect, Major, this is exactly the kind of reckless. I've identified the location," Marie continued, speaking faster. "I've monitored their patrol patterns. There's a 2-hour window every night when you'd get shot," Chun interrupted, "or captured, or both, and we lose a translator for a stack of papers that might not even exist. They exist. The Germans document everything. If we had those maps, we'd still need someone who could read them fast enough to matter," Harding said. "And we need to risk an asset to get them. You're valuable here, Russo, doing your job, which is translating, not playing commando." The meeting was over. She was dismissed. That night, the 29th took another 18 casualties from mines and artillery. The next morning, Marie requested a 3-day leave. It was approved. No one thought to ask why a translator needed time off in the middle of a campaign. She left the base at 2,200 hours on March 8th, wearing civilian clothes she'd traded for with a French family. She carried no identification, no weapon, nothing that would identify her as Allied personnel. If she was caught, the Geneva Convention wouldn't protect her. She'd be shot as a spy. The 7-kilometer walk took 3 hours because she had to avoid roads and German patrols. The chateau was exactly where the communications had indicated. A 17th-century manor house with a west wing, collapsed from artillery, the rest still intact. 2 guards at the front entrance. Lights in the east wing. She watched from a tree line for 40 minutes, counting patrols, timing rotations. At 0130 hours, she walked up the service road like she belonged there. A guard shouted at her in German. She responded in the same language, her accent perfect, her story rehearsed. She was from a village. Her home had been destroyed. She was looking for shelter, please. She had nowhere else to go. The guard was young, maybe 19. He looked uncertain. The older guard came over, looked her up and down, and said, "There's a refugee center in St. Lo." "St. Lo is full of soldiers," she said. "I'm afraid of soldiers." The older guard softened slightly. Wait here. He went inside. She stood in the cold, her heart rate spiking, every instinct screaming to run. The guard returned with a Wehrmacht lieutenant who looked annoyed. You can't stay here, he said in German. This is a military facility. I understand. I just need to rest for a few hours. I'll leave at dawn. Please. He studied her. She kept her expression desperate, helpless. Finally, he sighed. There's a servant's quarters in the back. You can stay there until morning. Don't wander. She thanked him profusely and followed a soldier to a small room that smelled of mildew. The soldier left. She waited 10 minutes, then slipped out. The chateau's interior was a maze of hallways and rooms. She moved silently, listening for voices, for footsteps. She found the command post on the second floor, a large room with tables covered in maps, documents, radios. 3 officers were inside, discussing something in low voices. She couldn't enter. Not yet. She waited in a side hallway, barely breathing. At 0220 hours, the officers left for what sounded like a shift change. She had minutes, maybe less. She entered the room. The maps were everywhere. Topographic maps, tactical maps, supply route maps. She scanned them frantically, looking for minefield markers. There, on a table near the window, 3 map cases labeled Minefelder, Sector 5 bis 9. Minefields, Sectors 5 through 9. She grabbed all 3 cases. They were heavier than expected. She turned to leave. A German soldier was standing in the doorway. He was as surprised as she was. For one frozen second, they stared at each other. Then he shouted. She ran, not toward the servants' quarters, toward the collapsed west wing, toward a hole in the wall she'd spotted from outside. Boots pounded behind her, voices yelling. She hit the west wing at full sprint, jumped through the gap in the wall, landed hard in rubble outside. Pain shot through her ankle. She kept moving. A gunshot cracked. Then another. Something punched her left shoulder, spun her halfway around. She didn't stop. She ran into the tree line, clutching the map cases, her shoulders screaming, warm blood soaking through her shirt. Behind her, more gunshots, but she was in the trees now, in the dark. She ran for a mile before she let herself stop, gasping, shaking. Her shoulder was bleeding badly. The bullet had gone through, which was good, no extraction needed, but the pain was blinding. She tore a strip from her shirt, packed the wound, kept moving. She reached Allied lines at 0510 hours, half conscious from blood loss, and collapsed in front of a sentry who nearly shot her before realizing she was speaking English. Major Harding was furious. Captain Chin was furious. The base medic who stitched her shoulder was furious. She'd gone AWOL, infiltrated enemy territory without authorization and gotten shot. She could be court-martialed. She could be sent home. She could be, sir, she said, her voice hoarse from pain and exhaustion. Look at the maps. Harding opened the first case. His expression changed. The maps were German military standard, printed on high-quality paper, marked with precise coordinates and symbols. Every minefield in a 40-square-mile area. Every mine type. Every safe corridor. Every kill zone. The second case had more. The third had overlays showing plant expansions. Chin picked up one of the maps, studied it, and said nothing. This is... Harding trailed off. This is everything. This is... How did you... I told you where they were. Marie said, I told you I could get them. You also got shot. I got the maps. Harding looked at her for a long moment. Then he called for the intelligence staff. Within an hour, the tent was full of officers studying the maps, cross-referencing them with known minefields, verifying accuracy. Everything checked out. The maps were real, current, and comprehensive. But there was a problem. The maps used German military symbology and coordinate systems. Translating them into usable intelligence would take days, maybe weeks. The offensive was scheduled for June 6. They had 3 months. We'll assign a team, Harding said. Cartographers, engineers, I can do it faster, Marie said. Chin looked at her. You're wounded. You need to recover. I can do it faster, she repeated. I know German military mapping conventions. I have a photographic memory. Give me 48 hours. You can't memorize 40 square miles of minefield data in 48 hours, Chin said. Watch me. She was right. It took her 36 hours. She worked through the pain, through the fever from her wound, through the exhaustion. She decoded the German symbols, translated the coordinates to Allied grid systems, and then did something no one expected. She memorized the safe routes, not just the general areas, the specific paths, the corridors that were sometimes only 3 feet wide, winding through fields of death like invisible trails. The male cartographers tried to help. They couldn't keep up. Her memory was faster, more precise. By the end of the second day, she had mental maps of 23 separate minefield crossings. She could describe them verbally, draw them on paper, walk someone through them step by step. Major Harding realized something that made his blood cold. If she died, the knowledge died with her. They could copy her notes, but the intuitive understanding of the patterns, the ability to adjust routes in real time, that was in her head. We need to get this information distributed, he said. Engineers with mine detectors can use your maps to... Detectors won't work, Marie said. Half these mines are wooden. Shoe mines, Holzminnen. No metal. You need manual probing. Then we'll send engineers with probes. The maps are weeks old. The Germans may have added mines. Someone needs to walk the routes who knows the patterns well enough to spot changes. The room went quiet. Chin said, You're not suggesting I'll walk them, Marie said. I'll walk point. I know the safe corridors. I can adjust in real time if I find new mines. That's suicide, Chin said flatly. That's the job. You're a translator, not a combat engineer. You have no training in, I have the maps in my head. Do you? The silence stretched. Finally, Harding said, We'll discuss it. They discussed it for 3 months. The answer was always no. Too dangerous. Too irregular. Too insane to send a woman to walk point through minefields. But as D-Day approached and invasion plans solidified, the minefield problem became critical. The hedgerow country of Normandy was a defender's paradise, and the Germans had seeded it with thousands of mines. Allied casualties from mines were projected to be catastrophic. Engineers would clear paths, but it would be slow, bloody work, unless someone could guide them through. On June 12th, 2 days after the initial landings, the 29th Infantry Division, the same unit that had been slaughtered at St. Lo, was tasked with advancing through a sector Marie's maps covered. The division commander, Brigadier General Norman Coda, reviewed the intelligence and asked a simple question: Who knows these routes best? The answer was Marie Catherine Rousseau. Coda requested her attachment to the division. Major Harding approved it. Captain Chin tried to block it and was overruled. On June 13th, Marie was briefed by the 29TH's lead engineer. He was a captain named James Kowalski, and he was blunt. I don't care if you're a woman. I don't care if you stole these maps from Hitler himself. If you get my men killed because you're wrong about a route, I will personally make sure you never work in intelligence again. Are we clear? If I'm wrong, Marie said, I'll die first. I'll be walking point. Kowalski stared at her. You're serious. Completely. You know what happens if you step on a mine. I've been shot stealing the maps that show where the mines are. I'll walk through them to prove the maps work. Kowalski looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, but we do this my way. You walk point, I walk second. You call out every step. If I think you're guessing, we stop. Agreed? Agreed. That night, she couldn't sleep. She reviewed the routes in her mind, over and over. Sector 7B, the same field that had killed 37 men in March. The safe corridor was 380 yards long, averaging 3.5 feet wide. The mines were primarily Teller anti-tank mines and shoe mines. The Germans had placed them in a pattern. Dense at the edges, sparse in the middle, with a cluster near the far end to catch anyone who thought they were safe. But there was a path, a winding, narrow path that her father's training let her see in the abstract patterns of the map, a path she'd memorized, a path she'd walk at dawn. At 0830 hours on June 14th, Marie Catherine Rousseau stood at the edge of Minefield Sector 7B with a thin metal probe in her hand and 300 men behind her. The field looked like every other field in Normandy. Tall grass, wildflowers, peaceful, beautiful, deadly. Captain Kowalski stood next to her. "Last chance to back out," he said quietly. "Last chance for you to back out," she replied. He almost smiled. "Fair enough. How do you want to do this?" "I walk first. You follow at 10 feet. Everyone else follows you in single file, stepping exactly where you step. No deviation. If I raise my left hand, everyone stops. If I raise my right hand, there's a mine off the path. Don't go that direction. If I go down..." She didn't finish the sentence. "If you go down, we stop and reassess." Kowalski said, "But you're not going down." "Right, right." She stepped into the field. The grass was wet with dew. The ground was soft. She moved the probe in a slow arc in front of her, pressing gently, feeling for resistance. 3 feet forward. Probe. Nothing. Step. Probe. Nothing. Step. Behind her, Kowalski followed, his eyes locked on her feet. Behind him, 300 men moved in a silent line, the only sounds of the probe touching earth and the distant crack of artillery. At 50 yards in, she found the first mine. The probe hit metal 6 inches down. She traced the edge. Teller mine, exactly where the map said it would be. She marked it with white tape, adjusted her path 2 feet to the left, kept moving. At 100 yards, a German machine gun opened up from the tree line ahead. Bullets cracked overhead. Someone behind her swore. She didn't stop. Stopping in a minefield was death. Moving was the only option. The machine gun fired in bursts. The gunner was aiming high, trying to suppress, not kill. Probably couldn't see her clearly through the grass. She kept probing, kept walking. At 150 yards, she found a mine that wasn't on the map. The probe hit something shallow, wooden. Shoe mine. New. Planted after the maps were made. Her heart rate spiked. If there was one new mine, there could be dozens. The entire route could be compromised. She stopped, raised her left hand. The line behind her froze. Kowalski moved up carefully. "What is it?" "Mine that's not on the map. Wooden. Recent. Can you route around it?" She closed her eyes, visualized the map, calculated. "Yes, but the corridor gets narrower, maybe 2 feet wide for the next 50 yards. Can you do it?" She opened her eyes. "Yes." She marked a new mine, adjusted her path, kept moving. The corridor was now so narrow that she had to place each foot with surgical precision. One step wrong, and she'd trigger a mine. One step wrong, and the men behind her would die. The probe became an extension of her hand. She felt every pebble, every root, every inconsistency in the soil. At 200 yards, the machine gun fire intensified. A bullet snapped past her head, close enough to hear the whip crack. She flinched but didn't stop. At 220 yards, she found another new mine, then another at 235 yards. The Germans had reinforced this section. The map was still mostly accurate, but they'd added mines to narrow the safe corridor even further. She adjusted, marked, walked. Her wounded shoulder was aching. The stitches felt like they were tearing. She ignored it. At 280 yards, someone behind her made a mistake. She heard the metallic click, then the explosion. The blast was 30 yards back, off the path. Someone had stepped wrong. Screaming, medics shouting. She didn't turn around. Turning around meant stopping. Stopping meant thinking about what just happened. Thinking meant fear. Fear meant mistakes. She kept walking. At 320 yards, the grass thinned. She was more exposed now. The German gunners could see her clearly. Bullets kicked up dirt to her right. She adjusted left, found another mine, adjusted right. The corridor was impossibly narrow now, 18 inches wide. She was walking a tightrope made of earth and luck. At 350 yards, her probe hit something that felt wrong. Not a mine, too large. She knelt, brushed away grass. A dead German soldier, half buried, his body bloated. She moved around him, kept going. At 380 yards, she reached the far side. Solid ground. No mines. She turned. The entire line of men was still following, stretched across the field like a thread. Kowalski reached her, his face pale. "Jesus Christ," he said. "How many did we lose?" "One." Private Morrison stepped off the path. "One." Kowalski looked back at the field. "We just moved 300 men through a minefield and lost one." The map was accurate. Mostly. He laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You just walked point through 380 yards of mines with machine guns shooting at you, and you're saying mostly." She didn't respond. She was already thinking about the next crossing. There were 4 more minefields between here and the objective. The day wasn't over. The second crossing was at 1,300 hours. Minefield Sector 8A, shorter, only 200 yards, but denser. The mines were packed tighter, the safe corridor even narrower. This time, when Marie stepped into the field, there was no ridicule from the men behind her. No jokes. No questions. They'd seen what she could do. They followed in silence. She found 14 mines on this crossing. 11 matched the map. 3 were new. She marked them all, adjusted the route, kept moving. German artillery started falling halfway through. Shells impacted 50 yards to the left, then 50 yards to the right. The Germans were bracketing, trying to find the range. A shell landed close enough to knock her down. She got up, ears ringing, and kept walking. Kowalski was shouting something, but she couldn't hear him. Didn't matter. The route was in her head. She followed it. They reached the far side with 0 casualties. The third crossing was at 1,630 hours. Sector 8C, the longest yet, 450 yards. Marie's shoulder was bleeding again. The stitches had torn. A medic tried to rebandage it. She waved him off. No time. The offensive was behind schedule. They needed to keep moving. This crossing had a new problem. The field was on a slope. Water had pooled in the low areas, obscuring the ground. She couldn't see where she was probing. She had to do it by feel alone. At 200 yards in, she found a mine submerged in a puddle. The probe hit it, and she felt the slight give of a pressure trigger. She froze. If she'd pressed harder, it would have detonated. She marked it with tape that immediately sank, adjusted her path, kept moving. At 300 yards, a German sniper started shooting. The first round hit the ground inches from her foot. The second hit Kowalski's helmet, denting it but not penetrating. He dropped flat. The line behind him stopped. Marie kept walking. She couldn't stop. Stopping meant the sniper had time to aim. Moving meant he had to lead a target through tall grass. She walked faster, probing as quickly as she dared. The sniper fired again. Missed. Again. Missed. At 400 yards, she was almost running, the probe stabbing the ground in rapid rhythm. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was the only way to avoid the sniper. At 450 yards, she reached the far side and collapsed. Kowalski reached her 30 seconds later. "Are you hit?" "No. Tired. You just ran through a minefield. The sniper didn't give me a choice." He stared at her. Then he turned to the men behind him and said, "Anyone who doesn't follow this woman's exact footsteps deserves to get blown up. Are we clear?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed back. They reached the objective at 1900 hours. A small village that the Germans had abandoned. The 29th set up a perimeter. Marie sat against a wall, shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. A soldier brought her water. Another brought food. She couldn't eat. Captain Kowalski sat down next to her. "We have 2 more crossings tomorrow," he said. "I know. Can you do it?" She looked at him. "Can you?" He smiled. "If you walk point, I'll follow. Then I can do it." That night, she slept for 4 hours and dreamed of white tape and metal probes and the sound of explosions that never came. The fourth crossing was at 0700 hours on June 15th, Sector 9A. This one was different. The map showed a safe corridor, but German radio intercepts suggested they'd reinforced it heavily. Marie studied the map in her mind, then made a decision. "We're not using the corridor on the map," she told Kowalski. "Why not?" "The Germans know we have their maps by now. They'll reinforce the obvious routes. There's another path, narrower, more dangerous, but less likely to be reinforced." "You're guessing." "I'm calculating. The Germans are predictable. They reinforce choke points and obvious routes. This alternate path is too narrow for vehicles, so they'll assume we won't use it." Kowalski considered. "If you're wrong, I'll die first. Same as always." He nodded. "Okay, your call." The alternate path was a nightmare. It wound through the minefield in a series of sharp turns, sometimes only 18 inches wide. Marie had to move sideways in places, her body pressed against invisible boundaries marked only in her memory. At 100 yards in, she found a mine directly on the path. Impossible to go around. The corridor was too narrow. She knelt, examined it with the probe. Teller mine, anti-tank, pressure trigger. If she could disarm it, they could step over it. If she made a mistake, she'd be vaporized. "Rousseau," Kowalski said quietly, "you don't have to." "I have to." She'd watched engineers disarm mines. She'd read the German technical manuals in the captured documents. She knew the theory. Theory wasn't practice. She used the probe to carefully scrape away dirt from the mine's edge, found the fuse housing, used her fingers. The probe was too crude to unscrew the housing. Her hands were shaking. The fuse came free. The mine was inert. She stood, stepped over it, kept moving. Behind her, 300 men stepped over a disarmed mine, and no one said a word. They reached the far side at 0830 hours. 0 casualties. The fifth and final crossing was at 1,400 hours. Sector 9D, the last obstacle before the division's objective. Marie was beyond exhausted. Her shoulder was infected. She could feel the fever, the heat radiating from a wound. Her hands were blistered from probe. Her legs were shaking. Kowalski pulled her aside. "You don't look good." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Let someone else." "There is no one else." She was right. No one else had the maps memorized. No one else had walked 5 minefields and survived. No one else could do this. She stepped into the field. This one was the worst. The mines were densest here, the corridor most complex. It zigzagged to the field like a maze. At 50 yards in, she found 3 mines clustered together, forming a triangle with a 2-foot gap in the center. She threaded through it. At 150 yards, she found a wire, tripwire, connected to a mine off the path. She marked it, stepped over it. At 250 yards, her vision started to blur. The fever was spiking. She stopped, closed her eyes, forced herself to focus. The map was in her head. She could see it. She opened her eyes and kept walking. At 300 yards, she found a mine that made her stop cold. It was directly on the path, and there was no way around it. The corridor was too narrow. She couldn't disarm it. It was a shoe mine, wooden, with a pressure trigger so sensitive that unscrewing it would set it off. She stood there, staring at it, her mind racing. Then she realized the map showed the corridor going straight here. But if she went back 10 yards and adjusted the angle, she could route around this section entirely. It would add 50 yards to the crossing, but it would avoid the mine. She turned, walked back, and called out the new route to Kowalski. He relayed it down the line. They adjusted. The new route worked. At 380 yards, she reached the far side. The division's objective, a crossroads that controlled access to 3 villages, was 200 yards ahead, undefended. The Germans had retreated. The 29th Infantry Division had advanced through 5 minefields in 2 days with a total of 1 casualty from mines. It was unprecedented. Marie Catherine Rousseau sat down in the grass and passed out. She woke up in a field hospital 12 hours later. Her shoulder had been restitched, the infection treated with sulfa drugs. A nurse told her she'd been delirious with fever, talking about coordinates and white tape. Major Harding visited on June 17th. "You're being recommended for a commendation," he said. "I don't want a commendation. You're getting one anyway. What you did What I did was my job. Your job was translating documents. You stole maps under fire, got shot, then walked point through 5 minefields while wounded. That's not translating." She didn't respond. Harding sat down. "Captain should want to apologize to you personally. Tell him it's not necessary." "He says it is. He says he was wrong about you. He says—" Harding paused. "He says you're the bravest person he's ever met, and he's been in combat since North Africa." Marie looked at him. "I'm not brave. I was just the only one who could do it. That's what brave means." On June 20th, she was visited by Brigadier General Cota himself. He stood at attention next to her hospital bed and said, "Miss Russo, the 29th Infantry Division owes you a debt we can never repay. You saved hundreds of lives, possibly thousands. Your actions will be studied and remembered. Thank you, sir. I'm also here to ask you something. We have more minefields ahead. We need—" "No." Cota stopped. "No. I can't do it again, sir. I'm sorry. I can't." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I understand. You've done more than enough." But the truth was more complicated. She could have done it again. Physically, she'd recover. Mentally, she still had the maps. But something had broken during that 5th crossing. The moment she stood in front of that shoe mine, unable to go forward or back, her mind had fractured. She'd been walking through death for 2 days, and death had been patient, and eventually patience ran out. She'd gotten lucky. She knew it. The men following her knew it. And she couldn't ask luck to hold a 6th time. She was transferred to a desk job in London. She spent the rest of the war translating documents, the same work she'd been assigned in December. No one mocked her now. When she walked into a room, conversation stopped. Soldiers stood. Officers nodded. She was the woman who walked the minefields, and that phrase carried weight. But she also noticed something else. Other women in intelligence were suddenly given more responsibility, more respect, more trust. A female radio operator was allowed to join a forward observation post. A female analyst was included in tactical briefings. Small changes, but changes. In August, she received a letter from a private named Dennis Morrison, brother of the soldier who died in the first minefield crossing. The letter said, "My brother made a mistake, and he paid for it. But you gave him a chance to cross that field. You gave 299 other men a chance to cross it and live. You gave my family a chance to know that his death wasn't meaningless, that he was part of something important. Thank you." She kept the letter. She kept it for the rest of her life. The war ended. Marie Catherine Russo returned to France in October 1945. She was 29 years old. She had a medal she never wore, a shoulder that ached when it rained, and a mind full of maps she couldn't forget. She tried to return to normal life. She worked as a translator for the provisional government. She helped rebuild her father's cartography business. She met a man, a teacher named Philippe, who'd spent the war in the resistance. They married in 1947. She never told him about the minefields. She never told anyone. The story was classified, buried in military records, marked secret, because the techniques she'd used were still considered tactically valuable. In 1950, she had a daughter. In 1953, a son. She taught them to read maps, to see patterns, to think spatially. She never explained why. In 1960, a historian researching the Normandy campaign found a reference in a declassified after-action report. Minefield crossings facilitated by female intelligence operative, identity classified. He tried to find out more. The records were still sealed. In 1972, Captain James Kowalski, retired, living in Pennsylvania, published a memoir called Walking Point. In it, he dedicated an entire chapter to the woman who saved my life and the lives of 300 men by walking through hell with a metal stick and a memory. He didn't use her name. He didn't know if he was allowed to, but he described what she'd done in detail. The book sold modestly. A few veterans read it and remembered. One of them was Dennis Morrison's brother, who wrote to Kowalski and asked, "Was her name Marie?" Kowalski confirmed it. The brother contacted a French veterans organization. They found her. In 1984, Marie Catherine Rousseau was invited to a ceremony in Normandy. She was 68 years old. She almost didn't go. Philippe convinced her. The ceremony was small, a memorial to the 29th Infantry Division. But when she arrived, there were 40 men waiting, veterans of the minefield crossings, now grandfathers, some in wheelchairs, some using canes. When she stepped out of the car, they stood at attention. Kowalski was there. He saluted her. She started crying. The French government awarded her the Croix de Guerre. The American government, finally, 40 years late, awarded her the Bronze Star. A general gave a speech about courage and sacrifice. But the moment that mattered was after the ceremony, when the veterans lined up to shake her hand. One of them, a man named Robert Chun, Captain Chun, now a retired colonel, waited until last. When he reached her, he said, "I told you women didn't belong in combat. I was wrong. I'm sorry." "You were doing your job," Marie said. "No, I was being an ass. You proved me wrong, and you saved my life doing it. I owe you everything." She shook his hand. "You followed me through the minefields. That took courage, too. I followed you because I didn't have a choice. You walked first because you chose to. That's the difference." The story finally went public. Newspapers picked it up. The woman who walked the minefields became a headline. Historians interviewed her. She told them everything. The theft of the maps, the gunshot wound, the 5 crossings, the shoe mine she couldn't disarm. A military analyst calculated that her actions had directly saved at least 800 lives. The men who crossed the minefields, and indirectly saved thousands more by enabling the 29th Division's advance, which shortened campaign and reduced overall casualties. Her techniques for reading German minefield patterns were declassified and published in a military journal. They were still being taught at combat engineer schools. In 1986, Marie Catherine Rousseau died of pneumonia. She was 70 years old. Her funeral was attended by 200 people, including 15 veterans of the minefield crossings. Kowalski gave a eulogy. He said, "Marie didn't think of herself as a hero. She thought of herself as someone doing a job that needed to be done. But heroism isn't about how you see yourself. It's about what you do when everyone else is frozen in fear. It's about taking the first step when the ground might explode. It's about proving that courage has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with who's willing to walk point. Marie walked first. We followed, and we lived because she knew the way." She's buried in a small cemetery outside Cannes, not far from the beaches where the invasion began. Her gravestone is simple. Marie Catherine Rousseau, 1916 to 1986. Below her name, a single line, Elle marchait en première. She walked first. Every year on June 14th, the anniversary of the first minefield crossing, a small group of people visits her grave. Veterans when they were still alive. Their children, their grandchildren, historians, students of military history. They leave white tape tied to the fence, a tribute to the markers she used to save lives. In 2004, a French documentary filmmaker made a film about her. It included interviews with the last surviving veterans of the crossings. One of them, a man named Thomas Riley, said, "I was 19 years old, and I thought I knew what courage looked like. I thought it was guys charging machine gun nests or holding a position under fire. Then I watched a 28-year-old woman walk into a minefield with bullets flying and a wounded shoulder, and I realized I didn't know a damn thing. She redefined courage for me, for all of us." The documentary won awards. It was shown in schools. A generation of French students learned about Marie Catherine Rousseau, the woman who stole Nazi maps and walked through minefields to prove that competence and bravery have no gender. In 2019, the U.S. Army Combat Engineer School added her story to their curriculum. Cadets study the minefield crossings as examples of tactical innovation, risk assessment, and leadership under pressure. They learned that she had no formal combat training, no engineering degree, just a photographic memory and the willingness to do what no one else could. In 2024, 80 years after the crossings, a memorial was unveiled at the site of Minefield Sector 7B. It's a simple stone marker with a bronze plaque. The plaque shows a woman with a probe walking through tall grass. The inscription reads, "On this ground in June 1944, Marie Catherine Rousseau led 300 soldiers through a minefield, losing only one. She walked first so others could follow. She was mocked, doubted, and wounded. She succeeded anyway. Remember her. The field is peaceful now. The mines are long gone. Wildflowers grow where men once feared a step. But if you stand there on a quiet morning, you can almost see her, a thin woman with a metal probe, moving carefully through the grass, marking the path, showing the way. She walked first, and because she did, hundreds of men walked after her and lived. That's not just a war story. That's a story about what happens when you give someone a chance to prove themselves, when you stop listening to prejudice and start listening to competence, when you let courage speak louder than doubt. Marie Catherine Rousseau didn't ask for recognition. She didn't demand respect. She earned it, one careful step at a time, through fields of death, with bullets flying and her shoulder bleeding and her hand shaking. She earned it by being right when everyone said she was wrong, by being brave when everyone said she was weak, by walking first when everyone else was afraid to follow. They mocked her until she stole Nazi maps under gunfire, until she walked through minefields and brought 300 men home alive, until she proved that the only thing more dangerous than a minefield is underestimating the woman who knows a way through it. She walked first. Remember that. Remember her.